She boarded the plane with grace, quiet strength, and a paperback in hand. No designer purse, no loud announcement, just a window seat and silence. But then came the whispers, the stares, the demand she shouldn't be in first class. And from there, everything unraveled. A wealthy white socialite launched into a tirade. A flight attendant froze. A cabin watched in silence until the black woman in seat 4A slowly reached into her bag and pulled out something that would change everything, because the woman they tried to humiliate. She wasn't just any passenger. She was Special Agent Celeste Morgan, and the badge she carried didn't just protect her. It would take down an empire. What did the outburst on that flight uncover? How did a simple act of racism spark a global investigation into corruption and fraud? And what happens when justice wears pearls instead of armor? This isn't just a story about race. It's a story about power, perception, and the quiet strength of a woman who refused to move. If you're ready to witness how one calm voice shook a corrupt dynasty, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The first-class cabin of Skybridge Airways Flight SB219 was silent, save for the occasional soft clink of crystal and the hum of the aircraft's systems preparing for departure. It was early evening, and the warm amber light streaming through the windows kissed the polished wood paneling and plush cream leather seats. Everything felt serene, intentional, a perfect place to disappear, if only for a few hours. Dr. Celeste Morgan stepped into the cabin quietly, her presence calm, almost unnoticed, but not invisible. She wore dark navy jeans, a clean white button-up shirt, and a soft charcoal gray cardigan. A leather carry-on bag hung from her shoulder, the kind worn by people who travel often, but never for luxury. Her black locks were twisted neatly and pulled back into a low bun, a silver ring glinting faintly on her left hand. To most, she looked like a college professor, unassuming, intelligent, composed, which was mostly true. She was a senior legal advisor with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, but today, she was flying as a civilian. No badge, no formal briefings, no agency escort. Just a one-way ticket to Geneva for an international conference on cross-border corruption and financial transparency. It had been a long month, and Celeste had been looking forward to this flight. Quiet, window seat, champagne, maybe, a book she hadn't had time to read, and the warm, detached stillness of being 30,000 feet in the air. Her boarding pass read 1A, front row, left window, her favorite. The gate agent had barely looked up when scanning her ticket, just a nod and a polite "enjoy your flight, Dr. Morgan." She had smiled back, automatically. When she entered the cabin, the young flight attendant, tall, early 20s, with soft brown curls and a name tag that read Noah, greeted her with the overly bright smile of someone still new to the job. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Can I see your boarding pass?" She handed it over smoothly. "Noah," she said, reading his name gently. "You'll be running this place by next year, I'm sure." He flushed slightly and smiled wider. "Thank you. You're in 1A, right this way." He gestured, and she moved toward her seat. Careful not to rush, every motion had intention. There was grace in her restraint, a woman who did not hurry to prove she belonged anywhere. She stowed her bag beneath the seat in front of her and sank slowly into the cushion. The seat embraced her body like a sigh. She leaned her head back for a moment. Just a breath. Just stillness. She didn't open her book right away. Instead, Her eyes traced the runway outside. Ground crew bustling, a jet bridge inching back. Her fingers lightly brushed the armrest. Her breathing slowed. For now, this seat, this small pot of space in a flying steel tube was hers, and no one could touch her here. Not the emails waiting in her secure inbox, not the case files she hadn't yet closed, not the old ache in her shoulder from her last field assignment, not the memories she didn't talk about because there were always memories. In row 2C, an older man in a navy blazer glanced her way, nodded politely. She nodded back, brief, cordial. Two travelers, no explanations needed. Then, Noah returned. "Can I get you something before takeoff? Dr. Morgan champagne, orange juice, sparkling water." She smiled softly. "Water. Please. Cold, if possible." "Of course." He disappeared again, and she leaned toward the window. The sun was dipping low. Pale gold clouds rolled past the horizon, thick like honey. Celeste let herself have it, this moment. She didn't know what would happen 3 hours from now, that she would soon be caught in a confrontation she didn't invite, that her presence, her very existence would be challenged, that a name she hadn't heard in years would reappear, opening a door she never planned to touch again. For now, it was just her, a woman, a seat, and silence, the kind of silence she'd spent years chasing. The quiet didn't last long. As the last of the first-class passengers boarded, a rustle of silk and the sharp click of designer heels broke the soft rhythm of the cabin. She entered like she owned the air around her. Victoria Langford, mid-50s, platinum blonde blowout that curled just right around her expensive cheekbones. Gold bangles stacked along her wrists chimed with every dramatic gesture. Her coat, a long floral print designer kimono, floated behind her like stage curtains. And yet, it wasn't her appearance that shifted the air. It was her presence, the kind that announces itself even when silent, the kind used to being obeyed or else. She paused just inside the cabin, blocking the aisle entirely, her face pinched with mild disgust. "Oh, good," she said under her breath. "At least they haven't changed the champagne." Behind her, Noah smiled uncertainly as he tugged a large Louis Vuitton roller behind her, straining slightly. "Be careful with that, darling," she warned sharply. "It's vintage. If that wheel snaps, it'll be your last day in the skies." Noah nodded quickly, placing the luggage gently near seat 1B, directly across the aisle from Celeste. And then she noticed her. Victoria's gaze slid to Celeste, sitting in 1A relaxed, headphones beside her, e-reader in hand, legs crossed neatly, eyes facing forward. There it was, the flicker, a micro-expression, barely visible, but Celeste had seen it too many times to miss it. The blink that lasted just a second too long, the subtle tilt of the chin, the faint narrowing of the eyes, recognition, discomfort, disbelief. Victoria didn't say anything at first. Instead, she turned to Noah with a tight-lipped smile. "There seems to be some sort of mix-up," she said. "I believe I'm supposed to be in 1A. Noah, still recovering from wrangling her suitcase, blinked. "Let me double-check for you, ma'am." He pulled out his tablet, tapping rapidly. "According to our manifest, you're booked for 1B. Victoria exhaled dramatically, adjusting her sunglasses, though they were still perched atop her head. "There must be a mistake. I always book 1A on this route. The lighting is better, and I can sleep without being jostled by carts. You must have missed something." Across the aisle, Celeste kept her eyes on her screen, but she was no longer reading. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was curious. Would Victoria push it? Would the crew fold? She had no desire to make a scene. But she also knew this wasn't about a seat. It never was. Noah smiled politely. I understand, ma'am. But, Doctor, Morgan is confirmed for 1A. She boarded before you. It appears she booked the seat first. At the word doctor, something tightened in Victoria's jaw. Oh, how nice, she said sweetly. Is that your title? Miss Celeste turned her head slightly, just enough to meet her gaze. Yes, she said, her tone neutral. It is lovely, Victoria replied, her voice flat. Then to Noah still. Surely something can be arranged. She might be more comfortable in one of the center seats. Yes, Celeste said nothing. She didn't have to. The implication was already crawling up the cabin walls like smoke. One passenger across the aisle adjusted his seat belt a little tighter. A woman in 2D tapped out a quick text. Noah shifted on his feet. I'm afraid we're full tonight. Ma'am. Victoria offered a smile that was all teeth. Of course you are. She took her seat in 1B with far more force than necessary, her bangles jangling as she tossed her handbag into the overhead bin. Her perfume wafted across the aisle, strong, floral, intentionally invasive. As she settled in, she leaned slightly toward Noah again. Champagne? Veuve, if you're not out yet. Yes, ma'am, he replied, grateful for the excuse to step away. Victoria settled back, crossed her legs, and glanced sideways at Celeste. I do hope you enjoy the view from 1A, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Celeste didn't look at her, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. I always do, she replied. The seatbelt signs chimed. The plane began its slow, deliberate taxi, and though the aircraft hadn't yet left the ground, Celeste knew this flight was about to go somewhere no one expected. The plane lifted smoothly from the runway, its engines humming like a lullaby for the elite. In first class, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft golden hue. Gentle shadows stretched along the carpeted aisle. Seat backs reclined. Drink carts whispered forward, and a hush settled like silk over the passengers. But not all silence is peaceful. In seat 1B, Victoria Langford shifted for the fourth time in 5 minutes. She huffed quietly, but with intent adjusting the silk throw over her lap, plucking at a non-existent crease in her blouse. Celeste noticed. She noticed everything. She kept her e-reader open, though she hadn't turned the page in some time. The words blurred, not from fatigue, but from the sharpness of her awareness. Decades of fieldwork had trained her mind to register even the smallest flickers, the glances, the breath patterns, the silences before the storm. Victoria was bristling, and the reason simple. Celeste wasn't her kind. She didn't look like someone Victoria believed belonged in 1A, not with her understated clothes, not with her quiet confidence, not with the calm she wore like armor. Victoria needed to reclaim control, and her weapon of choice was etiquette, masked as insult. She pressed the call button. Moments later, Noah reappeared, his hands folded in professional posture. Yes. Ma'am Victoria spoke in a stage whisper loud enough for the rows behind them to hear. I hate to be that passenger, but... She tilted her head toward Celeste, as if sharing a secret. I believe the woman beside me is using a fragrance that's quite strong. It's causing me discomfort. Noah blinked, confused. Celeste hadn't worn any perfume, not even scented lotion. She was meticulous about that while flying, knowing full well how personal space could become a battleground in the air. Still, She said nothing. Noah hesitated. Dr. Morgan. There's no fragrance, Celeste said softly, eyes still on her screen. But thank you, Noah. Victoria waved a hand, dismissing the moment. It's fine. Never mind. I'm probably just sensitive. Noah nodded and retreated, visibly uncomfortable. A moment passed, then another, then, in a voice too casual to be innocent, Victoria leaned over slightly and asked, Are you flying for business, dear? Or was this a gift? Celeste looked up now, eyes calm, voice steady. Neither. I paid for it. Victoria's laugh was small, tight. Oh, lovely. Well, it's just you don't see many women like you in seat 1A. No offense, of course. The air between them froze. Celeste blinked once, slowly, then set her e-reader down. She turned, just enough to meet Victoria's eyes fully. None taken, she said. Though you might want to think more carefully about how you define women like me. Victoria held her gaze, but the smugness wavered just a little. From row 2C, a man coughed deliberately. From 2D, the woman who had been texting earlier now watched without blinking, but Celeste didn't escalate. She didn't need to. Silence returned. Victoria busied herself with pouring another glass of champagne. The bubbles danced noisily in the glass, betraying her unsteady grip. Across the aisle, Celeste reached for her headphones and put them on. She didn't press play, she just let them cover her ears like armor. She stared out the window, beneath the clouds, cities passed unseen, borders blurred. Assumptions, however, did not, and while Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to reclaim the upper hand, Celeste sat still, not in submission, but in power. Because not all storms need thunder. Some begin with quiet resistance. The cabin had grown darker now, the mood lighting shifting into a tranquil shade of violet blue as Skybridge Airways Flight SB219 reached cruising altitude. In first class, most passengers reclined in comfort. Some sipped wine, others lost themselves in noise-canceling headphones or films flickering on personal screens. The rhythm of flight had set in. But in seat 1B, Victoria Langford had not settled. She couldn't, because Celeste Morgan, calm and unbothered, still occupied 1A with elegance that seemed to mock her. Victoria adjusted her blanket, again, clicked her tongue, again, pressed her champagne call button, again. When Noah approached, she gave a wounded expression. "Could I trouble you for more cashews?" she asked sweetly, brushing a hand through her perfect blonde curls. "The warm ones. And do be gentle this time. Last flight, someone cracked a tooth." He nodded quickly and disappeared. As soon as he was gone, she leaned toward Celeste, her voice syrupy. "You know, when I booked this flight, I never imagined it would be so lively." Celeste didn't reply. She scrolled slowly through her e-reader, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed. That silence enraged Victoria more than any words might have. Moments later, Noah returned with a small porcelain dish. Victoria took it without thanks, crunching loudly, and then, with a flick of her wrist, she accidentally knocked her champagne glass. The splash landed squarely on the armrest between them, narrowly missing Celeste's sweater, but enough to wet the edge of her seat. "Oh dear," Victoria exclaimed, faux shocked. "I'm so clumsy when I'm cramped." Celeste blinked once, then slowly pulled a napkin from her tray table and dabbed her seat. No panic, no anger, just an unbearable stillness. Victoria smiled, but it didn't last, because Celeste finally turned. "Ma'am," she said, voice low and clear. "If you spill anything else on me, I will document it as intentional harassment under FAA Interference Code 243. You may want to read up on it." Victoria's face twitched. "You're quoting laws now," she scoffed. "Do you practice law or just memorize it to sound clever?" Celeste offered a polite, tight-lipped smile. "I do both." The words settled like weight on glass. Just as Victoria opened her mouth to reply, she suddenly reached into her enormous handbag and pulled out a vintage perfume atomizer glass, gold-rimmed and outrageously ornate. Without warning, she spritzed it twice into the air. The scent exploded across the cabin, thick, cloying florals with a sharp chemical finish. Celeste's nostrils flared, not dramatically, but enough. It was an invasion, a calculated one. Victoria looked at her, smiling behind the cloud of perfume like a queen behind a veil of war paint. Across the aisle, passengers shifted uncomfortably. One woman pulled a scarf over her face. Celeste took a slow breath through her mouth, then closed her e-reader, placing it gently on her lap. Noah returned, drawn by the sudden scent. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to Celeste. "Is everything okay?" Celeste didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Victoria. Really looked at her. The stiffness of her shoulders, the desperation behind her smugness, the glint of pride barely masking the fear that was starting to rise. Then, softly, "Yes, Noah, I'm fine." But the tension lingered like the perfume in the air. Victoria turned her gaze toward the aisle, triumphant, for now she'd crossed a line, and she knew it. Celeste's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, and that scared Victoria more than she could understand, because deep down, she sensed it. This woman she was taunting, she wasn't just another passenger, and this wasn't going to end the way she hoped. The scent of oversprayed perfume still clung to the air like fog that refused to lift. Passengers around row 1 had begun exchanging glances, quiet, wary, sidelong, the kind of glances that said, "I don't want to get involved, but I see what's happening." The tension, now undeniable, buzzed like a low-voltage current through the cabin. And then, Victoria Langford did exactly what Celeste Morgan had known she would do from the start. She pressed the flight attendant call button again. Not a gentle tap, but a jab, sharp, deliberate, a trigger. Noah, already walking the aisle, rushed forward. "Yes, Mrs." Langford Victoria didn't look at him. Instead, she gestured towards Celeste with a manicured hand as though pointing to an overfilled trash bin. "There's been a mistake," she said, voice smooth but loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "This seat 1A is my usual seat. I always sit here. I have specific lighting needs for my correspondence." She turned and gave Celeste the kind of smile people usually reserve for mannequins they plan to return. "I'm sure this young woman wouldn't mind switching." Celeste didn't move, didn't blink. She simply folded her hands neatly in her lap. Noah glanced nervously between them. "Ma'am, I've double-checked. Dr. Morgan is confirmed in 1A. Victoria scoffed, lips curling. "Well, documents can be wrong, can't they?" She looked directly at Celeste now. "Honestly, I'm surprised she's even ticketed in first class." Her voice dripped with sugar and venom. Perhaps she used airline points or some employee discount. You know how generous they are with upgrades these days. The insinuation was sharp and obvious. A few passengers bristled. One man set down his wine. Celeste was still, too still. It was the kind of stillness that wasn't passive but intentional. the kind that people misread until it was far too late. Slowly, Celeste reached into the side pocket of her bag. Noah held his breath, but she didn't pull out anything alarming, just a physical boarding pass and a passport, both pristine, official. She held them out, not with urgency, but with clarity. "Here you go, Noah," she said softly. "If you need to verify again." Noah took them, hands slightly trembling. He looked down, scanned the barcode with his tablet. The green check mark glowed back at him. He exhaled. "Yes, ma'am, everything's confirmed. You're seated correctly." Celeste nodded once and returned the documents to her bag with methodical grace. Victoria's smile faded slightly, but she wasn't done. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, still loud enough to be heard. "Well, I still don't feel safe. She's been glaring at me and making me very uncomfortable. I believe she even threatened me earlier." Noah's face drained of color. "Ma'am, I'm just saying," Victoria interrupted, her voice rising now. "I shouldn't have to feel unsafe in first class. This is not what I paid for." Celeste finally turned to face her, her expression not anger, not fear, just an unfathomable calm. "Mrs. Langford," she said, voice steady, "I haven't threatened you. I haven't spoken to you since I took my seat, but your energy is hostile." Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. "You've been smug. It's intimidating. This is harassment across the aisle." A phone lifted. A small red light blinked. Someone had started recording. Victoria noticed. Too late. Celeste leaned back in her seat, her voice even softer now. "If my existence makes you feel unsafe, perhaps the problem isn't my presence but your prejudice." That sentence didn't land. It thundered. Even in the muffled hush of a pressurized cabin, Victoria turned red fast. "I know the CEO of this airline," she shouted suddenly. "Personally, we golfed together at the Ridge. He'll have your job. He'll have all your jobs." She jabbed a finger at Noah, then another at Celeste. "You'll both regret this." The plane wasn't moving, but the story was. Celeste didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The cabin had heard enough, and a storm was coming. The cabin had grown silent. Not the gentle, sleepy quiet that settles in after takeoff. This was different. This was the kind of silence that listens, the kind that waits for something to break. Across the aisle, two passengers exchanged glances. A man in 2C tapped his fingers nervously on the armrest. Someone farther back whispered into a phone, covering their mouth with a travel pillow. In seat 1A, Celeste Morgan sat completely still. But inside her, a storm churned. Not of rage, not of fear, of calculation, of memory. She closed her eyes briefly, and there it was, the familiar ache of every almost moment she'd endured in her career. The time an older male agent interrupted her mid-presentation to explain the laws she'd helped write. The dinner party, where she'd been asked if she was actually FBI or just the legal kind. The dozen airport lounges where she'd been assumed to be someone's assistant. And now, here she was again, 30,000 feet in the air, in her rightful seat, yet somehow made to feel as though she had snuck in through the galley. Celeste inhaled deeply. She didn't look at Victoria Langford, who now sat in smug silence across the aisle. Her arms folded like a child who had tattled and was waiting for the grown-ups to fix things. Celeste focused instead on the subtle whir of the plane's air circulation, the fabric of the seat beneath her fingertips, the weight of her badge still tucked inside the leather folder in her bag. She hadn't shown it. Not yet, because doing so would change everything. It would shift the narrative from black woman passenger being targeted to federal agent asserting control. And she wasn't ready for that, not unless absolutely necessary. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the eyes now silently watching. It was about the young flight attendant Noah who looked like he didn't know who to listen to anymore. It was about every passenger who had ever watched injustice unfold and whispered to themselves, "Don't get involved." She felt all of that, and she also felt something deeper. A growing pressure in her chest, the weight of constantly choosing between being respected or being palatable. She'd made a career of staying calm, staying composed. And now she was asking herself the same question she'd asked countless times. How much dignity must I swallow to be allowed peace across the aisle? Victoria pressed her call button again. A sharp ding. Noah rushed forward, visibly flustered. "Yes, Mrs. Langford. I'm sorry, but I just don't feel comfortable," she said, her tone syrupy again. "Her presence is disturbing my peace, her attitude, her energy." She placed her hand dramatically over her chest. "I'm starting to feel unsafe." That's grounds for removal, isn't it? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Noah turned to Celeste, dread in his eyes. "Dr. Morgan." As Celeste held up her hand, gentle but firm, her voice, when it came, was quiet, but every syllable carried like a chime in still air. "Noah," she said, "I've complied with every policy. I've shown my ticket. I've remained seated, respectful, and quiet." She turned her head just enough to glance at Victoria. If she feels threatened by me, perhaps she needs to examine why. Victoria opened her mouth, but Celeste wasn't finished. "I will not be moving," she said, "and I will not be antagonized. If this continues, I will be forced to respond officially." She didn't raise her voice, but the shift was unmistakable. It was the shift that happens when a match is struck just before flame. Noah blinked, unsure of what he'd just stepped into. Behind him, someone whispered audibly, "Good for her." Celeste leaned back, recentered herself in the seat. She was no longer questioning whether she should act. She was simply waiting for the moment they would force her to. Victoria Langford stood up. Not suddenly, but with the self-importance of someone who had been waiting for a cue in her own private theater. Her silk wrap fluttered at her elbows. She made a show of adjusting it, stepping halfway into the narrow aisle between seat 1A and 1B, looming now over Celeste Morgan like a self-appointed steward of the skies. "Since no one here seems capable of enforcing basic safety," she declared, loud enough for rows 2 and 3 to hear, "I'll handle it myself." Celeste didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. Victoria narrowed her eyes and took one step closer, gesturing toward Celeste's lap where the e-reader rested. "That doesn't even belong to you." "Does it?" she snapped. "What are you even reading? Are you even allowed to be in this seat?" She reached toward Celeste's e-reader. Not fast, not sudden, just entitled. And that was enough. Celeste moved, not aggressively, but with a speed and precision that made everyone watching forget to breathe. Her left hand rose not to hit, not to strike, but to block. Palm open, fingers firm. She stopped Victoria's hand midair, just inches before contact. The movement was efficient, measured, tactical. The kind of movement you don't learn in etiquette school. The kind you only learn in training. And suddenly, the cabin felt different. Celeste's voice was no louder than before, but now it rang with a tone no one could miss. "Step back," she said. Victoria blinked, confused by the calm, You think you can. But Celeste was already reaching into her leather carry-on, slowly, deliberately, no rush, no panic. She withdrew a black wallet, slim, professional, flipped it open in one practice motion, and there it was, the badge, polished gold, Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S., Department of Justice. It shimmered under the overhead light like judgment itself. Gasps rippled down the row like fallen dominoes. Victoria staggered back a half step, her face drained of color as if someone had pulled the power from her spine. Celeste's voice didn't change. It didn't need to. "Ma'am," she said, "I am Special Agent Celeste Morgan, FBI. You have attempted to interfere with a federal officer during protected travel. You have initiated multiple false claims, attempted to escalate the situation, and now made a move toward physical contact." She closed the wallet with a soft snap. "Now, I will ask you one final time, return to your seat. Do not speak to me again, and remain quiet for the rest of this flight." Victoria didn't move, couldn't. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Across the cabin, someone said under their breath, "Oh my God." The man in 2C was no longer pretending not to record. His phone was up clear, steady, blinking red. The woman in 2D was whispering, "She's FBI, she's FBI." Noah stepped forward, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. Should I get the captain?" Celeste nodded once. "Yes, now." He sprinted toward the cockpit like a lifeline. Victoria finally sat back down. Her hands were shaking. So was her voice when she said, almost inaudibly, I didn't know who you were." Celeste turned her head slightly. Her eyes met Victoria's with clarity, not cruelty. "That's exactly the problem," she replied. "You don't act differently because of who someone is. You act right because of who you are." Victoria said nothing. She couldn't. And for the first time in that cabin, she understood what power really looked like. It wasn't loud. It didn't need threats. Sometimes power was quiet, measured, worn by women who'd been underestimated too many times to count. The badge had been shown. The warning had been issued. The line had been drawn. Now the world beyond the cabin was beginning to stir. Somewhere around row 3D, a passenger was already uploading. The man in 2C, still holding his phone like a courtroom exhibit, added a caption with shaking thumbs. "White woman harasses black FBI agent in first class gets shut down. Hard, watch till the end. Skybridge scandal, FBI karma, Langford meltdown." And with one tap, it was airborne, while the plane cut silently through the night sky. Its Wi-Fi carried the moment into the bloodstream of the internet fast, raw, and irreversible. At the front of the plane, Captain Elaine Morse stepped into the first-class cabin. Trim, mid-40s, blue uniform crisp, expression unreadable. She had been briefed through the intercom by Noah, and she already knew the basics. But when her eyes fell on Special Agent Celeste Morgan, she straightened her shoulders. She spoke calmly. "Dr. Correction. Special Agent Morgan," she said, voice low but commanding. "I've been informed of a serious disruption. Can you confirm the situation for me?" "Please," Celeste nodded, rising slightly, not standing, but just enough to be heard. "In brief, ma'am," she said, this passenger gesturing toward Victoria Langford, who now sat utterly deflated, has repeatedly attempted to displace me from my assigned seat through escalating verbal harassment, false security concerns, and, just moments ago, attempted physical contact. The captain's eyes flicked to Victoria. Is this true? Victoria's mouth opened, but nothing coherent came out. She never said she was FBI. She finally gasped. How was I supposed to know Captain Morse didn't blink? You weren't supposed to. You were supposed to behave like a decent human being. That applies to all passengers. A wave of approval moved invisibly through the cabin. Victoria's mouth clamped shut, her cheeks now blotchy red, her composure fully shattered. The captain turned back to Celeste. Agent Morgan, on behalf of Skybridge Airways, I deeply apologize for what you've experienced. I assure you, the situation is being handled appropriately. Celeste nodded, her voice soft but resolute. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your professionalism. The captain then addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We regret the disruption. Please remain seated while we consult with ground security for protocol on arrival. She gave Victoria one last look. You will not be continuing on future flights with our airline, she said bluntly. Expect a permanent ban pending full review. For now, I suggest you remain quiet. Victoria swallowed hard. Her lips pressed together until they lost color. And then, silence. For the first time in 2 hours, the air was still again. But outside the cabin, all hell had broken loose. Within 40 minutes, the video had surpassed 250,000 views. The hashtags were spreading. Langford meltdown. Ian she tried, the wrong one. Ian fly while black. Comment sections exploded. She's an FBI agent. The audacity OMG. This is why receipts matter. That badge shut her whole life down. Langford. Wait, is that Charles Langford's wife, the banking CEO. That last comment, it sparked something, because people started making connections. Someone pulled an old image from a New York Times charity gala. There she was, Victoria Langford, arm in arm with her husband, Charles Langford, CEO of Langford Private Holdings, a global finance firm with operations from New York to Zurich. And just like that, the internet didn't just care about her outburst. They started caring about who she was married to, which meant they started caring about what he might be hiding back on the plane. Celeste had reclined her seat again. She hadn't said another word since the captain left. Her e-reader was back in her lap, her headphones over her ears, but she wasn't reading, and no music played. She was thinking, turning over the name Langford in her mind like a loose thread. She'd seen it before, not in headlines, in case files, in digital trails, in an old offshore account her team had flagged but never followed. Langford Private Holdings. Too clean, too protected. But maybe not anymore. Maybe this wild, humiliating public spectacle at 30,000 feet was the beginning of something bigger. She sat still, eyes closed, letting it settle, knowing this wasn't the end of the flight. It was just the beginning of the fall. Some names don't stick because of headlines. Some names linger because they show up, just barely, in whispers, in minor footnotes, in transaction logs where they shouldn't be. Celeste Morgan had a mind like a filing cabinet, each memory categorized, cross-referenced, and time-stamped with intuition. And now, as Skybridge Flight SB219 cruised over the Atlantic, she sat unmoving, replaying that name Langford, the moment Victoria Langford had screamed, "Do you have any idea who my husband is?" Something had clicked. Celeste hadn't reacted then, but she had remembered. She had heard Charles Langford's name before, not in boardrooms, not in politics, in a briefing, months ago, a lead on a dormant offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. It had been part of a wider investigation into shell corporations and illegal capital flows complex stuff, built to confuse and misdirect. Her team had labeled the Langford connection circumstantial. No further action. Not enough dots. But that was before tonight. Before Charles Langford's wife had melted down on a flight. Before the entire internet was putting two and two together and asking, who is this woman? And now, Celeste wasn't just remembering, she was connecting. She quietly reached for her tablet and opened the FBI's secure encrypted access point. The plane's onboard Wi-Fi was slow, but stable. She logged in using biometrics and 2 layers of codes, typed in a few keywords, searched the financial crimes database. Her fingers moved fast. She wasn't looking for headlines. She was looking for patterns. Phoenix Ark Investments. A company flagged 2 quarters ago for unusual real estate buys in Switzerland. No physical office, no employees, just transactions. One of the signatures on the shell documents, C. Langford. Celeste stared at it, her mind racing. The original case labeled Dormant Class 3 Tier. Not priority had been shelved due to insufficient high-level linkage. But that was before she knew Victoria Langford was part of that structure. Before the internet exploded. Before millions of people saw Victoria at her most unfiltered, claiming privilege and threatening strangers with her husband's name like a sword. Now, things had changed. Celeste didn't need permission to escalate this anymore. She just needed to send one email. She tapped out a secure message. Subject urgent, reopen file. P47813, Phoenix Ark, Langford Holdings team. Additional evidence has emerged during personal travel, connecting Charles Langford, Langford Holdings to hostile high-profile incident with federal agent on board commercial aircraft. Recommend immediate cross-analysis of Phoenix Ark investments, Cayman shells, Zurich transfers, and all filings signed C. Langford. High probability of concealed financial activity and tax evasion. Details upon return. S.A. Celeste Morgan. She encrypted it, sent it, then locked the tablet and leaned back again. Her pulse wasn't racing, it was steady, because she knew what she had just done. She hadn't pulled the thread. She'd cut it loose, and now, that whole polished Langford tapestry, glossy foundations, spotless suits, gala nights was about to start unraveling, not in noise, but in documentation, in quiet subpoenas, in frozen accounts, in silence that builds just before an empire falls. Hours later, as the plane descended toward Geneva, Celeste felt the first rays of sunlight touch her window. She hadn't slept. She hadn't needed to. Her mind was clear, her hands still in row 1B. Victoria Langford sat hollow-eyed, mascara smudged, facing forward like a woman waiting for judgment. She didn't dare speak again, and Celeste didn't offer her a single glance, because now the case was open, and justice had started moving. The wheels of justice don't always screech. Sometimes they click, one lock at a time, one name, one thread. Special Agent Celeste Morgan didn't say much when she landed in Geneva. She gathered her bag, nodded politely to the customs officer, and let the brisk air outside the terminal settle her nerves. But while she walked through the concourse like any other traveler, her email was already making noise across multiple agencies back in D.C. By the time she reached her hotel, the Phoenix Ark file had been marked active, and then the dam began to crack. At FBI Financial Crimes HQ, Senior Analyst Mara Lynn was the first to spot it. She'd received Celeste's encrypted report at 2:17 a.m. By 6:05, she had unearthed a series of mirrored accounts across Zurich and the Cayman Islands matching just enough to suggest that Phoenix Arc wasn't simply laundering funds, it was hiding them. From governments, from investors, from regulators, the common thread, Langford Holdings. On paper, the company looked polished, fully compliant, well audited, regularly donating to charity, but in the cracks, backdated invoices, fake consultancy fees, transfers just below reporting thresholds, and now video footage of Victoria Langford screaming about her husband's power on a flight that had gone viral. The video was now being dissected by millions, not just social media users, reporters, investigators, attorneys, and, critically, agents. The name Charles Langford was no longer buried in footnotes. He was on front pages. 2 days later. Celeste sat quietly in a conference room inside the U.S. Embassy in Geneva. A meeting had been hastily arranged. The financial attaché, Interpol liaisons, 2 DOJ representatives. She presented her case without dramatics, just documents, timelines, recorded links, and Victoria Langford's public outburst, now dissected frame by frame in newsrooms across 3 continents. The mood in the room was tense, focused. Someone from Interpol leaned back and murmured, "So that's why she was so confident." Celeste gave a single nod. Privilege breeds arrogance. Arrogance leads to mistakes, and mistakes leave trails. Another added, "Meanwhile, in New York, the walls were beginning to close in around Charles Langford. His firm was served a federal subpoena. A quiet audit was escalated. 2 of his overseas executives resigned the same afternoon, no explanation. Reporters began asking uncomfortable questions at press briefings. Is Langford Holdings under investigation? Did your wife's behavior expose deeper legal issues? Charles tried to stay composed. But, behind closed doors, he exploded. What the hell was she thinking? His legal team urged silence. His PR team urged an apology. His compliance officer quietly lawyered up. The illusion was cracking. The name Langford, once whispered with admiration, was now laced with suspicion. Celeste stayed quiet. She didn't gloat. She didn't tweet. She didn't need to. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about pattern recognition. It was about understanding how empires fall not from loud explosions, but from ignored warnings, and one woman's arrogance on an airplane that had just become the match. Victoria, meanwhile, had gone into hiding. Her social media vanished. Her charity affiliations were under review. The luxury magazine that once put her on the cover released a bland statement about ongoing internal reflection. Behind those press releases, a woman locked inside her own home, watching as every privilege she once wielded was now working against her. Every contact became a question mark. Every friend suddenly unavailable. Even her husband had stopped returning her calls, and all because she couldn't fathom sharing a row with someone she deemed beneath her. Celeste, back in her hotel room, watched the news quietly. Langford Holdings under scrutiny. DOJ confirms investigation into Phoenix Arc. Video of first-class meltdown surpasses 11 million views. She sipped her tea. Her fingers hovered over her badge for just a second. She thought of all the times she'd chosen silence, all the times she let comments go, all the times she swallowed pride to avoid escalation. This time, she had chosen truth, and it was working. The cracks were spreading, and the empire was crumbling. It was still dark when the vans rolled up the driveway. At 5:47 a.m., the gates of the Langford estate were breached by federal agents in black jackets and tactical vests. Their breath fogged the morning air as they moved silently across the manicured lawns and marble steps. Inside, the mansion was quiet until it wasn't. A door slammed. A dog barked. Then came the chorus of commands. Federal agents, hands visible. This is a warrant for search and seizure in a bedroom wrapped in silk and silence. Charles Langford sat up in disbelief. He stumbled out of bed, barefoot on imported tile, muttering in disbelief. This has to be a mistake, but it wasn't. One of the agents handed him the folded warrant. He read the header, United States v. Charles Langford charges wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, obstruction of justice. His hands trembled. He dropped the paper. In another wing of the house, Victoria Langford watched the hallway flood with agents. She didn't scream. She didn't protest. She just stood in her robe, lips pale, eyes hollow as the life she had carefully curated with white tablecloth dinners and gala invitations crumbled like aged marble. One of the agents paused, recognizing her from the now infamous plane video. He didn't speak. He didn't smirk. He just turned and kept walking. That was worse. By noon, it was everywhere. FBI raids, home of Charles Langford, an international fraud case. Langford holdings accused of laundering $280 through shell networks, the fall of a power couple from penthouse to prosecution. Stock prices tanked. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. News anchors said things like unprecedented and symbolic collapse. Behind every headline, Celeste Morgan's email, behind every raid, Celeste Morgan's report, and behind every frozen account, revoked board seat, and seized asset. The silent work of agents who had waited years for someone to give them the missing puzzle piece. Celeste didn't fly home for the arrests. She stayed in Geneva, completing her scheduled meetings, offering insights to Interpol and the DOJ's International Liaison Office. She didn't chase the spotlight. She had no need. But when her secure phone buzzed at 6:15 p.m. local time, she stepped into a private room to answer. It was her section chief. "You were right," he said simply. Celeste nodded. "I knew the name. I just didn't know how loud it would ring." There was a pause. "You started a domino effect." "Celeste, you know that, right? I didn't start it." She replied. "Victoria did." Another pause. "Your report is already being used as a model for early pattern tracking in other cases. You should be proud." Celeste smiled faintly. "I'm satisfied. That's more useful than pride." Meanwhile, at a press podium in New York, the U.S. attorney stood in front of a row of microphones. "Today's arrests are not just about financial crime," she said. "They are about accountability. No one is above scrutiny, not because of wealth, not because of reputation, and certainly not because of who they think they are." Behind her, enlarged visuals displayed a web of shell corporations, all stemming from Phoenix Arc Investments. In the bottom corner, circled in red C, Langford. Victoria Langford's mugshot was released the next morning. Gone was the flawless hair, the gold jewelry, the smirk. She looked stunned, deflated. Her face became the image on screens across America, paired with captions like "Socialites outburst, leads to federal takedown, first-class tantrum, exposes global fraud scheme." Her lawyer tried to reframe it. She's a victim of her husband's secrets. She was under stress. She regrets the incident on the plane, but the world wasn't buying it. because the internet never forgets, especially when truth had been caught on camera. And the truth was, she weaponized her privilege. She tried to humiliate a stranger. And that stranger happened to be the one person who could unravel her entire world. Celeste, on her final night in Geneva, sat by her hotel window watching snow fall over rooftops. Her badge rested on the table beside her. Not a trophy, not a weapon, just a reminder that sometimes justice begins in silence, that the most powerful act isn't the takedown, it's the refusal to be moved. The flight home was quiet. Celeste Morgan took her usual window seat 4A, not first class, not premium, just her preferred aisle where she could watch the clouds pass and let the silence speak. No one made a scene. No voices rose in indignation. No assumptions were thrown like knives in a silk glove. Not this time. Not after the world had watched what happened the last time, back in the U.S. Life moved on, but not untouched. Langford Holdings had declared insolvency within 3 weeks. Dozens of their partner accounts had been frozen across 6 countries. Charles Langford was facing up to 25 years. Victoria, though not the architect of the scheme, was now a symbol of privilege, unchecked entitlement, and how one moment of prejudice could shake an empire. The plane video had become case study material. In business schools, in diversity seminars, in federal briefings. It wasn't just about race, or wealth, or gender. It was about perception, power, presumption, and the cost of misjudging someone in public, especially when that someone carries a badge. As Celeste touched down at JFK, she stepped off the plane into a terminal that somehow looked different. Or maybe it was her. People stared, but not with suspicion, with curiosity. Someone whispered her name near Gate 6. A teenager with a backpack mouthed, "That's her," to his mom. Celeste didn't flinch. She smiled, nodded, and kept walking. She had work to do. Not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that changed them. 2 weeks later, she stood behind a podium of her own, not at a courthouse, but at a community center in D.C., where young black girls gathered every Saturday for a program called Voices Forward. They had invited her to speak, not because she was famous, but because she had stood still, and that, to them, was enough. Celeste looked out at a room full of hopeful eyes, some filled with questions, some with fear, most with fire. She took a breath and spoke. The world will tell you who you're not. It will assume, dismiss, underestimate. But none of that matters more than how you carry yourself when someone tries to move you. You don't need to shout to hold power. You don't need to prove you belong to anyone. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay exactly where you are. That night, as snow again dusted the city, Celeste stood by her apartment window with tea in hand. The city shimmered, not loud, not flashy, just alive. Her badge rested in its case. She didn't need to open it to feel its weight. She'd already used it in the most important way possible, not to command fear, but to hold space, for truth, for dignity, for change, and for every woman who'd been told to move. She'd said no, and the world had listened. Some people try to take power by force. Others hold it quietly, patiently until the world catches up. Celeste Morgan didn't yell. She didn't fight. She stood. And in doing so, she reminded us all of something far greater than authority dignity. This story wasn't just about a racist outburst at 30,000 feet. It was about how prejudice can unravel privilege, and how integrity, when tested, becomes the spark for justice. Let this serve as a reminder. We must speak up for what's right, even if it's with silence. Even when we're underestimated, especially when we're told we don't belong, to all who've been told to move, to be quiet, to sit in the back. This one's for you. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, angry, or empowered, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate strength. Your voice matters, and the world is finally listening.